So hello everyone. My name is Babis Tsurakakis, and today I'm going to talk about algorithm design for large-scale datasets. So this is the outline of my talk. First, I will make an introduction. Then I will talk about the first problem, which is fitting piecewise constant segments to one-dimensional signals. Then I will discuss about finding dense subgraphs in large graphs, and then I will conclude. Okay. So I'd like to say a few things about data science in general. There exists a lot of excitement around it. And if I had to summarize the reason in one sentence, it's because it gives us the opportunity using data to make better decisions and understand phenomena around us, such as, for instance, Kant's revolution. However, besides this excitement, there has to be cautiousness. So there was an interesting interview of Michael Jordan in the Journal of Spectrum IEEE recently. Maybe some of you have already seen it, where he argues that if we don't have principled approaches to studying data, this can lead to junk. It can lead to very wrong inferences. So data science is let's say, a new field where many existing domains meet. For instance, data in cleaning and integration are vital to data science. Building systems, databases, MapReduce from Google is also very important. User interfaces, social sciences, privacy, security. So the way I approach data science is through efficient algorithm design and implementations, and data mining and machine learning techniques. So the type of data set, one of the two types of data sets that I'm particularly interested in are graphs and networks. And I will use these two terms interchangeably. So graphs model a wide variety of modern data sets. For instance, the web graph can be modeled as a graph where each vertex is a web page. And you have a directed edge from I to J if there exists a hyperlink from page I to page J. The internet at the autonomous systems level, you can see an illustration, a visualization here. Social networks, the brain is also a graph where vertices are neurons and edges are synapses. And actually there exists a big initiative both in US and Europe, just, I will say in rough terms, to see how this graph looks like, to find the edges of this graph. Airline networks are modeled also as graphs, and images can be modeled also as graphs, where each vertex is a pixel, and you add edges between pixels depending on certain features, for instance, color, intensity, etc. So I would like to quote Daniel Spielman, who says that graph theory is a new calculus. And part of why this is true, or at least why I agree with it, is because graphs are used in a daily basis to analyze several important data sets: log files, user browsing behavior, telephony data, web pages, shopping history, and many other types of data sets. However, okay, so it's clear that graph theory has given a lot to analyzing data sets. But the interplay is two-way. So I would like to give an example of a problem which arises from applications and gave rise to a new graph connectivity concept. So the reason why I mention it is because I worked a lot during my dissertation on it, and currently I'm working with Noga Alon, Alan Fries, and Andrei Dudek on finishing some open cases. So in cellular networks, this problem comes up. So there exists this requirement that between, probably it's for security reasons, but this problem comes up there. For any two vertices, you require that there exists at least one path between every pair of vertices in such way that this path is assigned distinct frequencies, okay? So a natural thing to do is you want to minimize the number of distinct frequencies you want to assign to edges, to channels, okay, such that this requirement holds. So this problem gave rise to a graph connectivity concept called rainbow connectivity, which is the minimum number of colors you need to color the edges of a given graph, such that for any pair of vertices, there exists at least one path where all colors are different. And I believe this interplay between graph theory and applications will emerge also in the next years in many, many ways. So I'd like to bring up one example because I think it's increasingly important. So when I was at CMU, Carlos Gestrin had data from the Intel Berkeley lab. So what you can see here is the map of the lab, and each hexagon is a sensor. Each sensor was measuring several different things, including humidity, temperature, and various other things, light intensity, voltage. You had this data, and you want to, the main problem there exist several problems, but you're going to find patterns, because if you know the patterns of the data, then you can say when an anomaly takes place. You can raise flags and say, this side, the sensors here, are down, so we have to substitute them. So these data are modeled as tensors, and it has been proven that the generalization of singular value decomposition from matrices to tensors, which are called higher order SVD and Tucker decompositions, are very useful in mining this data. Okay? So I worked on this problem, and I knew this use of tensors for this type of mining data, but recently there was a very nice paper by Anand Kumar, Geh, Su, and Kakede that shows that tensors can be used to find overlapping communities. And actually, very recently, I think Orr had a paper where he used tensors to unmix certain types of permutations, rankings, okay? So I believe this interplay between graphs and applications is going to be two ways, and hopefully ideas from one field to the other will flow, and several applications and problems will be resolved through this interaction. The second type of data set I would like to mention are biological data sets. So nowadays we have a lot of genomic data, gene expression data, protein interaction data. These are actually networks. And array comparative genome hybridization data, which I'm going to say a few words later about them in further detail. But constantly there exist new types of data coming out which require new types of analysis. For instance, the best paper in ISMB last year, in 2013, looked into fluorescence in situ hybridization data. And I would like to say a couple of words about it because it will come up in the first problem. So when every human, when he or she is in a healthy condition, has 2 copies of each gene. We're diploid organisms, okay? In the somatic cells, at least. So in a healthy state, what you would see for a given mass of cells is that all cells would have 2 copies of each gene. But when someone has cancer, then there exist copy number abnormalities. So certain cells, for given genes, have different number than 2. So you can find cells in cancer where they have 3 copies of a given gene, or 1 or 0 copies. You can have up to 10s. Unfortunately. But anyway, so we have all this data, and the goal, the eventual goal, is not to create big data warehouses out of this data, but to extract some insights, to create value out of them. So here I'm quoting the book of Professor Mumford from Brown University, where I believe this is the underlying theme of data mining applications. So most of the data, actually all the data we look, come from real world processes. So they're generated from objects, processes, and laws which exist in the real world. So there exist patterns within this data, but extracting them is a different story. We need to find the correct set of hidden variables before detecting them. So we need to come with also correct formulations, okay? And the excitement behind big data is because it has a potential to answer long-standing questions, such as, for instance, why certain mutations cause cancer, whereas others don't, but also emerging problems. So, for instance, how do we do efficient viral marketing on Twitter or other types of networks? But this comes with big challenges, computational, statistical, mathematical challenges, okay? So now I would like to go to the first part of the talk. Let me say this is a part of a bigger project I led during my PhD. Collaborators, the main collaborators are Gary Miller, Richard Peng, Russell Schwartz, Stanley Shackney, who is not unfortunately with us anymore, and Maria Charlie. So what I'm going to discuss, and I hope to give some intuition behind these techniques, are results that appear in these 2 papers. Okay, so now I would like to give you a description of the problem. As I said before, when a patient has cancer, we observe DNA copy number abnormalities. So how do we measure these abnormalities? The way we do it is as follows. We have a reference DNA that you can think of as the DNA of a healthy person, okay? So every cell has 2 genes, 2 copies of each gene. And then we have the DNA of the patient. So these 2 DNAs are placed in an array, they're hybridized, and by looking the intensities of these spots, what biologists can do, they can measure along the genome the log ratio of the copy numbers of the test DNA divided by the reference DNA. So in our case, reference DNA equals 2 for humans, because as I said, we're diploid. So now the question is, we have lots of this data. They are very noisy, and we want to denoise them. So one naive thing that you can do is, you want to find the integers, because these are noisy values. So if you try to calculate from a given value here, t is not going to be an integer. You want to calculate the true test DNA copy numbers. And what you can do is, you find the real number and you round it, okay? So this is something that you can do. Doesn't work very badly, but we can do something much better with respect to denoising this type of data sets. And the reason why we can do something better, this comes from medical knowledge, is because we know that nearby points along the genome tend to have similar copy numbers. So the standard way that this problem is being treated in the literature, in this literature, the biological literature, you treat this data as a one-dimensional time series. And what you're trying to do, you want to fit piecewise constant segments on these points, okay? So this is the high-level description of the problem. And now I would like to give a very clean mathematical formulation, which comes from a penalized maximum likelihood problem, okay? That assumes Gaussian noise. Okay, so the input is this signal, P1 through Pn. And what you want to do, you want to output a signal, F1 through Fn, such that it minimizes this objective. This objective has 2 terms, okay? So C is a positive constant. Let's assume it's fixed for our purposes. So the first term tries to give a good fit between the input signal and the output signal, okay? So if there was no second term, you could trivially set F to be equal to P, and you would have a 0 error. But for all real data, because these numbers P1 through Pn are distinct numbers, they would give you n different segments. So the second term is there to penalize this overfitting. So you want to balance between these 2 terms. You want to find good fit, but not with too many fitted constant segments. So it's a very clean problem. Somehow it appears, if not exactly like this, in a very similar way in the Kleinberg-Tardosh book. And it's a very simple exercise for undergraduates to give an exact dynamic programming running time algorithm, which runs in order n square time, okay? So you just need to keep the first and second moments in an online way. So now the question, the very interesting theoretical question, in my opinion, is whether this order n square is tight. Does it mean that we cannot go below n square? So what I'm going to show you are 2 techniques. They're approximation techniques. I believe you could go below n square and have an exact algorithm. I don't know how, and this is an interesting open problem. So the first technique is going to take the recurrence that comes out from this from this optimization problem. It's going to decompose it into several smaller optimization problems, which I call Monge, and I will define it later. It's going to give a 1 plus epsilon approximation, and it will run in n log n over epsilon time. Then I'm going to give you a second technique of independent interest for a very similar recurrence. It's essentially the recurrence from the original problem, shifted. It comes up in different places. And I will give you a technique which gives n to the 4/3 essentially algorithm. I will explain later the parameters. But delta is anything positive, as small as you want, any small positive constant, okay? And the second technique will give you additive error, not multiplicative. Okay. So as you understand, dynamic programming is a major technique for solving a plethora of problems. So I'm going to discuss literature with respect to speeding up dynamic programming. So the first historic instance of speeding up dynamic programming was due to Don Knuth, who gave an order n squared time for computing optimal binary search trees. Okay? So initially, the algorithm of Gilbert and Moore, the analysis was yielding a cubic algorithm. So this is the two-dimensional recurrence for optimal binary search trees, but written in a more general way, where instead of having the specific weight function, I just have any weight function W. So what Francis Yao observed is that the recurrence coming up in optimal binary search trees, when it satisfies certain conditions, specifically this inequality, which is called the quadrangle inequality, it has a very strong geometric intuition, but I won't have time to discuss about it. And also the monotonicity property, you can turn any two-dimensional recurrence of this form into an n-square algorithm. So one of the things you can keep from this talk is if you run into a dynamic program algorithm, think whether your function satisfies these inequalities. Okay? If it does, then you can speed it up for free. Okay. So these inequalities, as I said, have a very strong geometric intuition. They were first introduced by Gaspard Monge when he was studying transportation problems. And I'm going to refer to them as quadrangle Monge inequalities, okay? So the one-dimensional analog, the previous recurrence was two-dimensional. When you have one-dimensional recurrence of this form, where when you are at index j, you try to find a breakpoint I, where you're going to minimize over all possible candidate breakpoints the function evaluated at I plus a weight from I to j, where W is Monge. First, Epstein, Galil, and Giancarlo gave an n log n time algorithm, and later, Larmor and Schieber gave the best possible algorithm, which runs in linear time. Okay? So now let's go to our problem. If you write down your recurrence, it looks like this. This is the basis of the recurrence. And here, when you are at index I, you're trying to minimize over all possible breakpoints j smaller than I minus 1. Of course, you have the optimum for breakpoint j, and then you fit a segment from points j plus 1 through I. So the value that you're going to fit is going to be the average of those points. So you're going to set the value of that constant segment to being the average because it minimizes the squared error. So this is why you have this term here. And of course, you have to pay C because you have just fitted one piecewise constant segment from points j plus 1 through I. So we can rewrite this in this way, where SIs are the partial sums that you can see over there. SI is the sum of the input points from 1 through I. Okay? So it turns out that this is the term that kills the Monge property, and actually the denominator. Okay? So we cannot apply these tools that I just told you about in the previous slides to this problem. One easy way, I guess most of you have seen the optimal binary search trees, but the intuition behind Monge inequalities, why they allow speed up, is because when you are at index I, you can discard several candidate breakpoints. And then you take the total cost, you amortize, and you win an order n factor. So an easy way to see why this function is not Monge is the following. Suppose you have this input 0, 2, 0, 2, 0, 2, C equals 1. So you can, if you do the algebra, you can see that the optimal solution is given by fitting one segment per point for these specific values, okay? But once a new point comes, 1, then the optimal value becomes equivalent to fitting one segment for all points, okay? So what you see is that when you are at index n, you have actually to look for all possible breakpoints. This gives some intuition why you cannot just discard several candidate breakpoints for this objective. Okay, so now let's go to the technique. I would like to make a couple of observations that the problem we're trying to solve is a shortest path problem on a DAG, where the DAG is defined by this set of edges. For every j smaller than I, you have an edge, a directed edge from j to I, and then the weights, which are specified by our problem, okay? So the second observation is when you perturb the edge weights by a factor of 1 plus epsilon, the shortest path will not change by more than that factor, okay? So that's what we're going to do. So I'm omitting, of course, the algebraic manipulation. You can write the weight function in this problem as a fraction where the numerator is this thing here, the denominator is I minus j, and you have also the constant cost. And this function, if you look at papers on Monge optimization, is the second function as an example that satisfies the Monge inequalities. The first one is just the sum, a simple sum of elements. So the denominator is Monge, but the denominator is not. So a very natural idea is we're going to approximate the denominator by a constant. Okay, let's see how we do this. So when we're at index I, we're going to break the possible candidate breakpoints into buckets, into regions that get multiplied by 1 plus epsilon. Okay, so it's an increasing length of a bucket. So algebraically, this is what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm breaking the choices of breakpoints j into these intervals such that this inequality holds. That's it. And as you can see, I just need at most log n over epsilon buckets throughout the execution of my problem. So now what we're going to do the following. So the optimum at index I, as I said, is a minimum over all possible breakpoints of this thing here. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to use my buckets. And I'm going to say that I'm going to minimize over buckets. And then within the bucket, I'm going to minimize this objective. And I'm going to substitute this denominator by something constant, which I know. Okay? So as you can see, now this problem has become Monge. So I have broken my initial problem into log n over epsilon subproblems, each of which is Monge. But there exists one subtle point that I'm going to take care in the next slide, is that when you consider the kth bucket, you need to make sure that the breakpoint will fall in that bucket. So when we consider the kth subproblem, we set the function to be as it is within that bucket, but outside that bucket, we set it to be something large enough so that we can guarantee that the optimal breakpoint will fall definitely inside here. Okay? So this is the idea of the technique. And this is how you set your function. And this results in a 1 plus epsilon approximation algorithm using n log n over epsilon running time. Okay? By running the Larmor-Schieber algorithm for each sub-problem, for each bucket. So this is a high-level description. And now I would like to give you a description of the second technique. So this is our recurrence. Compared to the previous recurrence, I have just removed a sum of squares, so just a constant. So this is a recurrence. And I'm going to show you how you can approximate it within additive epsilon error. So first, I would like to define 3 quantities. Probably you'll need to see the second slide in order for the notation to become totally clear. So dpi is the quantity we wish to compute. We will try to approximate it. But we're not going to solve this problem exactly. So as we move from index 1 through index n, we accumulate error. Okay? So these values are the ones that we're going to compute. dpi tildes. And dpi with a bar is the optimal value of the recursion using the approximate values, the tilde values. So let me show you the next slide. So as I said, we accumulate error. So dpi bar is going to be the minimum over all possible breakpoints of the approximate values that we compute through our algorithm. And what we're going to do, we're not going to compute, again, this exactly. We're going to compute it approximately in such way that the error between dpi bar and dpi tilde is epsilon over n. And then we can use induction to actually argue that the total error is within additive epsilon. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do binary searches on this value dpi bar. We're going to search for it approximately by doing binary search queries. And how do we do these queries? So let me give you the idea. So when I'm at index I, so I fix my index I, and I'm asking, is dpi bar less or equal than x plus c? I put c so that c's cancel out conveniently. And by doing algebra, you get this expression. Okay? So what is this expression? The left-hand side is a constant because we are at index I is fixed, and we're asking whether there exists an index j such that this inequality is true. But I can write this inner product as, this expression as an inner product of these two vectors, okay? So what are we doing? This vector depends only on I, okay? So it's constant, it's a slope. And this is constant. So what I'm doing, I have a bunch of candidate breakpoints over all indices j. I have a slope, a hyperplane, and I'm asking whether the intersection of a bunch of points defined by all possible breakpoints j has a non-empty intersection with this hyperplane. And this is a computational geometric problem that we can solve efficiently due to this data structure of Agarwal, Epstein, and Matusek. So this idea, like for each index I, you perform binary searches approximately on this value, and this reduces to this efficient problem that you can see the running times here. So at the end of the day, what we're getting, as I said, we iterate through indices, we maintain this data structure, and every query, for each index I, we perform these binary search queries, which reduces to emptiness queries that we can solve efficiently, which gives us an n to the 4/3 plus delta times log u over epsilon. Epsilon is additive error. You can think of u as being the maximum of the input points and the constant c, okay? So that's a second technique. So I think, yeah.
Can we go back to the statement of the problem? What is an additive epsilon?
This one?
No, the original problem that is
Yeah. So this is the original problem, and the recurrence now, it's a shifted recurrence by not having this constant here. So this is what is missing from...
Even more basic.
So this is probably what you mean?
The fish, I think.
The initial thing, you're given P1 to Pn, and
okay.
you want to find F1 to Fn.
Okay, this one.
So here you're, so I'm just wondering, what does an additive epsilon mean? So in particular, it means that, so it's not epsilon times n, it's really epsilon is your...
So as I said, the additive error does not refer to this objective. So this problem, specifically, gives you this recurrence, okay? This recurrence.
Okay.
Okay. So the 1 plus epsilon multiplicative approximation refers to the original problem. But during studying this problem, we considered a recurrence that doesn't have this constant term. And for that one, we were able to give an epsilon additive approximation.
I see.
Yeah, so it's a technique which I wanted to mention independent of the original problem. The first one refers to the biological problem. The second one refers as a general technique to this specific type of recurrences.
But it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have any...
No, so it's different. So it's for a shifted objective, so things wouldn't work for this specific problem that well. But I think it's of independent interest, and you can use it in other optimization problems that come up and have this form. Yeah.
So for the original biological problem, so you penalize the number of segments that I fit.
Yep.
But don't biologists have some sort of prior about how many true segments they should be?
Yeah, so as I said, I consider C fixed, but you can train so there exists data with ground truth, and you can train your data on that, your function on that data, find a good C, and then use that C throughout.
I see, but is it obvious that it works even if it's not monotone? Like I believe the function somehow looks like this, so my number of data points should be like 10 zeros unlikely, 100 unlikely.
So this function works very well for data that look like fairly piecewise constant segments, and it can tolerate Gaussian noise up to a certain good amount of Gaussian noise. If your function looks like that, then I wouldn't be using this objective. Yeah.
If I answer the question correctly, it's about the prior on the number of segments. So it seems like your objective function corresponds to a prior where you have sort of exponentially decreasing probabilities as we increase the number of segments.
Okay.
And whether that actually corresponds to the prior that biologists would give, or that is
Yep.
in particular monotone decreasing and at an exponential rate. Yeah, talking about having 1 segment versus 2 versus 3.
Okay. So the answer to the number, with respect to the number of segments, is you can only say if you apply to real data. It works for some other biologists from British Columbia. I'm going to show the results, used this objective for some value C, which they chose. And it turns out to work well. But there exist other settings where you have too much noise. The number of segments can increase a lot just because of the noise. And there exists a lot of biological insights. You need a domain expert to be able to tell you, this thing should not appear there, or this thing is actually a mutation within the mutation. So that's why for this cursory analysis that we performed on that data, we had to have Dr. Shackney and Maria Charlie that were able to say things about the biological significance of the findings and the number of segments. Okay. So I just abstracted things and took it to the theory level, and but I think this is a very, very valid question with respect to the actual problem. And let me say that this problem comes up in many other settings, such as databases, histogram construction, and coming up with a better than quadratic exact algorithm. I think it's a very interesting problem. Okay, so as I said, so this is how we quoted our method. These results come from, so I didn't include, because I knew it's not a comp bio audience, I didn't include many bio results. I just included some results from Ding and Shah from the Molecular Oncology Center from University of British Columbia, where you can see for data that they had ground truth, this is the methods they developed in their paper. This is the method that exists in the MATLAB toolbox. This is another popular method, and this was our method. So this simple model was giving this kind of results. Okay. So now I would like to go to the second topic, finding dense subgraphs. Actually, this is a dense subgraph extracted using our methods from DBLP datasets, where you have this nice mining problem where you give a set of query vertices, and you ask to find the dense subgraph that contains those query vertices. And we used Christos Papadimitriou, who has worked on different domains. And this subgraph was extracted when we were giving Christos Papadimitriou and Serge Abiteboul, who is a database person, and we're extracting a very, very dense subgraph containing database researchers. And when you were giving Papadimitriou and Manuel Blam, you were getting the same thing, but with theories. Anyway, so I'm going to discuss about how do you find this kind of subgraphs in real graphs. And I would like to give some motivation behind it. So why are we interested? Actually, finding dense subgraphs is a key primitive for many, many graph mining applications. So just a few well-cited applications. It's being used to find tight co-expression clusters in microarray data. It's being used to find communities of web pages that have the same topic, and also to find spammers. It was used in a recent paper by Angel in VLDB to find hot stories in real time from news data. And it's also used for frequent pattern mining. So you can think that if a supermarket has a database with who buys what, so you have this vector, you can have an edge between products of how frequently they were co-purchased. So finding dense subgraphs corresponds pretty much to finding frequent item sets. So it's a key primitive for many important applications. And I would like to tell you a few things about several formulations, popular formulations. So when you want to find a dense subgraph, you can think you want to maximize this objective. So the nominator, so S is a set of vertices. E of S is a number of edges induced by S. That means edges which have both endpoints within S, divided by S choose 2. And it's a very natural objective. It's between 0 and 1. But the problem with maximizing this objective is that even one edge gives you the maximum possible. So people have come up with other objectives. So a natural problem is trying to maximize the average degree over all possible subgraphs. Okay, so this is called the densest subgraph problem. And there exist several variations of the densest subgraph problem where you impose cardinality constraints on the set S. So there exists a very strong dichotomy between these formulations. This one can be solved in polynomial time. These two are hard. Okay, they're NP hard. And let me say a few things about the densest subgraph problem. So it's solvable in polynomial time, as I said. There exist several ways to do it by Goldberg, Charikar, Kuller, and Zaha. There exists a very fast, practical one-half approximation algorithm by Charikar that peels vertices that have the smallest degree iteratively from the graph. And for the k-densest subgraph problem, let me say that the best known approximation algorithm gives an approximation ratio of n to the 1/4 and is due to researchers from Princeton University, Bhaskara and others. So, okay, so this is something which is very interesting from a practical perspective. There exists a very strong dichotomy. So, as I said, finding dense subgraphs is a key primitive, okay, for many applications. So many practitioners want to extract dense subgraphs from their graphs. So they have to choose between NP-hard problems and polynomial time formulations. The problem is that polynomial time formulations don't give you the kind of graphs you actually want to find. They don't give you large linear cliques. So we have NP-hard formulations, and I had a paper last year in KDD where I gave a systematic study of several objectives and some new objectives, which are not only NP-hard, but due to connections to the maximum clique problem, they're also inapproximable. So you end up, if you use these formulations, you end up using heuristics, and you have no guarantees. On the other hand, we have an objective which is solvable in polynomial time, but for many graphs, it doesn't give you the type of large linear cliques we're interested in. Just to give you a small numerical example to give you an idea of what people see in practice. So for a small graph with 115 vertices, the densest subgraph problem extracts as its optimal solution the whole vertex set. And Fe, recall Fe is the number of induced edges divided by S choose 2. So the closer this number it is to 1, the closer we are to a clique, is pretty small. And this happens when at the same time we have a set of 18 vertices which have this kind of density, close to 0.5. Okay? So we have large linear cliques in graphs, and of course in larger data sets this is more pronounced, but we cannot find them using the densest subgraph problem in many scenarios. So here is an interesting question that motivated the research that I'm going to show you. Can we combine the best of both worlds? Can we find polytime solvable formulations that actually succeed consistently in giving you large linear cliques on real data? And I'll give you a solution to this problem. Okay, so the solution turns out to be a slight variation of the densest subgraph problem. So I'm going to define the triangle densest subgraph problem where I'm going to maximize over all possible subsets S the number of induced triangles divided by the cardinality of S. So I'm trying to maximize not the average degree, but the average number of triangles. So one first observation is that these two objectives are in general very, very different. So to see why, consider two graphs, so, or the union of these two graphs, a triangle and a complete bipartite clique. Okay, so the densest subgraph problem will output this thing here. The triangle densest subgraph problem will output this small triangle here. The true question is, what happens on real data? Okay, so this is a message that I would like to give, is that the triangle densest subgraph problem succeeds consistently on real data in finding large linear cliques. So so as I said, it's solvable in polynomial time. Goldberg's exact algorithm is based on max flows, but the way he constructs a network does not adapt to the triangle densest subgraph problem. I'm not going to give details, but what he does, he adds a source and a sink, and then adds edges with appropriate weights between vertices of the graph. Okay? So if you try to construct similarly network by placing different weights on these edges, at least all choices that I tried did not seem to succeed. So I tried, for instance, having for each edge the number of triangles that the edge participates in. Doesn't work. So I'm going to give you a generalization of this technique, which works for any k densest subgraph problem. In the case of triangles, it runs in m to the 3 halves plus n times t, where t is a number of triangles, plus the minimum of nt cubed time. And the general idea to come up with a first algorithm is to ask binary search queries. Does there exist a set S such that the number of induced triangles is greater than alpha times S, where alpha is a value that we're doing our query on? So these three probably shouldn't be here. I had some slides where I had the proof, a proof sketch. So forget it. It's just a number of induced triangles. Okay? So we're going to binary search on this value alpha. And it turns out that we can upper bound the objective between n squared and 0. So since we're doing binary searches, log n iterations suffice. Another subtle point is between the possible values that the objective takes in order to be able to prove that the algorithm terminates, is that you can say that between any two distinct values, there has to be a distance at least 1 over n squared. So it turns out that n squared divided by 1 over n squared gives you n fourth. Take the log. 4 log n iterations will suffice to binary search on that value. But let's see what the binary searches correspond to. So this is, you can find the details in the paper. I don't include the proof. They correspond to max flow computation on this network. Okay? So I've overloaded a little bit my notation just to be consistent with the source sink notation. T is here the sink, not the number of triangles. So I have a source, I have a sink, and I construct a bipartite graph where on the left-hand side, I have one vertex for each vertex in my original graph. And on the right-hand side, I have a vertex for each triangle in my original graph. So from vertex V, I add arcs to vertices in the right-hand side when that vertex participates in those specific triangles. Okay? So the capacity of the arc is 1. From the right-hand side to the left-hand side, I add arcs of capacity 2. And for each vertex here, I add exactly 3 outgoing arcs towards the 3 vertices that consist of that specific triangle. Okay? So as I said, each vertex here corresponds to a triangle, 3 vertices. So I have 3 outgoing arcs. So it's 3 out regular from this side. And then from V, I add arcs to T, from every V to T of capacity 3 alpha. And it turns out that, that using max flows on this problem, for each possible value of alpha, we do log n such searches. It can give you the answer. Okay? I'm a little bit sketchy about, I don't say the details. If you want, you can see the paper or you can ask me at the end of the talk. Okay, so as you observe, this generalizes to any k-click density. I will explain how later. But the Charikar algorithm, which is an efficient algorithm, generalizes much easier than the max flow algorithms to this setting. So instead of peeling out the vertex with the smallest possible number of edges, you peel out the vertex with the smallest possible number of triangles for n iterations. And out of the sequence of n subgraphs that you create, you output the one that has a maximum triangle density. And this gives you a 1/3 approximation to the triangle densest subgraph problem. So we're going to evaluate it. And also in the paper, because I'm interested in big data and scaling to massive data sets, there exists this theorem that you can create a MapReduce efficient algorithm which runs in log n epsilon over epsilon rounds and gives you a 1 over 3 plus 3 epsilon approximation for any epsilon greater than 0. Okay? So it also uses as a subroutine a very efficient algorithm of Suri and Vasilevitsky for counting triangles in MapReduce. Okay? So let's see a little bit some results just to give you an idea of what happens on real data. Because this piece of work is interesting because it gives you, as I said, something which is a slight variation of a theoretical concept that had been known for many years, but solves a very practical problem consistently in practice. So delta of S is going to be the average degree. Fe of S, I defined it before. It's a number between 0 and 1. The closer to 1, the closer we are to a clique. The average number of triangles, tau of S. And I'm going to also to use Ft of S, which is the number of triangles divided by S choose 3. So when this number and this number are closer to 1, the closer we are to having a clique. So I'm going to have a table where I present results from various methods. ds is going to refer to exact optimization for the densest subgraph problem. 1/2 to Charikar's 1/2 approximation algorithm. TDS is going to be the triangle densest subgraph problem using max flows. Let me say that you can remove the log n factor by using parametric maximum flows. And the 1/3 TDS problem is the 1/3 approximation algorithm which I just described. Okay, so each row corresponds to each of the 4 methods. Okay, so for each method we use several data sets. This is a small subset of what exists in the paper. And for each method we measure what fraction of the graph the method outputs, delta, which is the average degree, Fe, which is between 0 and 1, the average number of triangles, and the triangle density, which is also between 0 and 1. So let's say the data set that I told you in the beginning. So there are 2 main things from this slide. The first is the exact optimization and the approximation algorithms tend to give the same output, which is very interesting. It seems that the worst case graphs tend to be some highly mathematically constructed graphs, artificial graphs. So real data behave very similarly for the exact and the approximation algorithm. For instance, you can see for the football, as I said, the densest subgraph problem extracts the whole graph. It gives you an average degree of 10.66, density of 0.0094, triangle density, average number of triangles 21.12, and Ft is 0.003. Whereas when you go to the triangle densest subgraph problem, you can find this clique that I told you in the beginning on the 18 vertices, which gives you an edge density of 0.48 and the triangle density of 0.21. This thing is even more pronounced in other datasets. So this is a very interesting thing, finding polytime objectives to find dense subgraphs. And as you can see, this method tends to be very successful in this. Yeah?
Presuming that they're all proxies for this rate objective that you would like to minimize if you could, right?
Yeah.
But you can't, because it's going to be hard. It's the densest subgraph, right? So do you know what's like the conductance of the set that you find with different?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So not only this method, the triangle densest subgraph tends to give very dense subgraphs within, but it also tends to give lower conductance sets compared to the first one. And there is a clear intuition. Like when you have a set S, which is dense, this method decides to bring in vertices when they participate in many triangles within that set. Okay? So whereas the other method tends to bring in vertices that have several neighbors. However, you can think of, let's say, a person that makes random connections. Okay, the first method would bring it in, even if it's not a member of this community, because in conductance tends to appear in a different setting where you want to find clusters, minimum conductance clusters. So the first method tends to bring in vertices that are not parts of the community because they don't participate in many triangles, whereas the second brings exactly the ones that are members of that community. So think of a spammer. Yeah, I'm just saying that once you have a set S, how do you decide if you have to put another vertex inside? Okay, so the algorithm works by peeling, but what I'm saying is that I give you a set S, I tell you it's dense. How do you decide which other vertex do you bring in? So the first method is going to be of the form, I bring something in, if the number of edges towards that set is at least the average degree. If it has more than the average degree, it's going to bring it in. And my point is that in real data, this is not a good indicator of community membership. Triangles are much better indicators of community membership. And I think this is the intuition why you see this radical difference on real data between these two objectives. Okay. So as I said, yeah.
So, again, sort of the main extension of this would be not to, to continue this with like, instead of triangle, cliques with size 4, things
Yeah.
like that.
I did it, yeah. So I went up to cliques of size 4 for the experiments. And what I observed is that the benefits, so for many data sets, they were identical with k equals 3, k equals 4. So let me also have this slide that the method works for any k, and you get polytime algorithms for k constant. So the gains that you get from going from k equals 2 to k equals 3 are way more significant than going from k equals 3 to k equals 4.
So now, related question to this. It seems like a generalization of, a common generalization of all of these would be something like densest subgraph and hypergraphs. So you can imagine what to solve the triangle, densest triangle problem. You take your original graph and then you create a hypergraph where the edges are triple corresponding to the triangle.
Yep.
And it seems like what you're doing is not finding a densest subgraph of that hypergraph.
Yep.
This is will work for K-Cleave, also for constant K, which reduces this problem. And the question is whether the flow-based methods or the approximation of the methods apply to this more general problem of densest subgraph and hypergraphs.
Yep.
Even if they don't come necessarily complete with triangles.
Yeah, this is an extension that I'm actually working on. This is one of the extensions of the other extension is pacification, when you can actually, so as if the question was heard by everyone, extending these techniques to hypergraphs. And the other thing that I find very interesting is coming up with better exact algorithms and using also approximation algorithms where you sparsify the graph. And it seems that there exists also a strong connection between this problem and flows. So not only you can use, so if you write, okay, so now I extend myself. If you write down an LP for this problem and you take the dual, it reduces to multi-commodity flows. And there exists a lot of techniques there. So I'm looking of how ways to make these things even more efficient with respect to the runtime. Okay. So yeah. So now I would like to conclude this talk, since I have a few more minutes, about discussing how do you count triangles efficiently. So as I said, one of the subroutines we use during this previous algorithm is counting triangles. So everyone who works on real-world networks has realized the importance of triangles in many applications. Clustering coefficients come up in many graph mining applications. So the main intuition why this is true, at least one of the main intuitions, is because friends of friends tend to become friends themselves. So if A is friend with B and A is friend with C, there is a higher probability than if B and C were random persons to have an edge between them. Okay? So again, just because I don't know who works on this area, to give you an idea, you observe on graphs with roughly 200 vertices more than hundreds of thousands of triangles. So this is one of the established real-world properties of real-world networks. The other is small diameter and skewed degree distributions. So there exist many applications. I would like just to mention one. So they're being used in practice to find spammers. And what people do, they create a scatter plot. They have on the x-axis the degree, and on the y-axis they have the number of triangles that each vertex participates in. To find spammers, you look for high degree, low number of triangles. And the reason is spammers tend to formulate random connections, so they tend to participate in very few triangles. So it's something that works in practice. Many such applications, which come with no theoretical guarantees, but practitioners are interested in, are based on counting triangles. So I'm going to give you some algorithms that give you efficient triangle counting. So the first paper that I had on this topic is from 2008. So what I observed was real-world networks have very special spectral properties. And because a number of triangles for each vertex can be written as the sum, a weighted sum of the cubes of the eigenvalues, where the weights are given by entries of the eigenvectors, everything refers to the adjacency matrix representation of the graph. So what happens in real-world networks is the following. If you sort the eigenvalues with respect to their absolute value, and then you plot them, what you observe is that few eigenvalues are well separated from the rest, and the rest are pretty much symmetric around 0. Okay? So what happens is that few eigenvalues will give you very good approximation to this problem. And this is formalized, at least on random graphs, random power law graphs, by result of Chang, Liu, and Wu. So what this thing inspired me to do is to design a system which was called Pegasus, that used matrix vector multiplication, because you can compute constant number of eigenvalues. Assuming it's a little bit more involved because the gap also plays a role in terms of how many you use. But think that you need constant number of matrix vector multiplications to compute few top eigenvalues. Okay, so we built a system at CMU called Pegasus, which was the first system that was able to deal with terabyte graphs, and it's publicly available. So we came up with this implementation that optimized this primitive. Once you want to build a system, you have to choose a primitive on which you are going to optimize and build your system. However, I was more interested in strong combinatorial guarantees, and what I'm going to show you is the work on triangle sparsifiers. So the notion of a graph sparsifier is I'm giving you a graph G, and I want to find a sparse graph H such that H is close to G in a certain sense. So two senses that have been studied were cat-preserving sparsifiers by Bengtschoor and Karger, and then their generalization by Spillman and Teng on spectral sparsifiers. I was interested in triangles, so I'm going to show you triangle sparsifiers. And to give you the theorems, I need to introduce some notation. So T is a number of triangles. T capital is going to be our estimate. Delta is going to be the maximum number of triangles an edge participates in. So this is always bounded by order n. An edge cannot participate in more than n minus 2 triangles. And T max is going to be the maximum number of triangles a vertex is contained in. So this is order n squared. And I think I have results, half of the results that don't use T max. Anyway, so here is a very simple algorithm, which is joint work with Michalis Kolountzakis from University of Crete and Gary Miller. And it works like this. For each edge, you toss a coin with probability P of keeping that edge. You get a sparse graph, and then you reweigh, you count triangles there using your favorite method, and then you reweigh that value by P cubed. So now the interesting question is, how small can P be? Okay? Because, if you make it too small, then your estimate is going to be junk. You're not going to have any guarantees on how close you are to the true number of triangles. So here is a theorem. If P is greater than the maximum of delta over T times some polylog n factors, and polylog n factors divided by T to the 1/3, then you can prove strong concentration. So let me say what the main technical difficulty is in this result. So if you try to apply some standard martingale method using Kazuma's inequality, what you observe is that the Lipschitz constant, how much your function can change in one step, plays a critical role in the concentration. Okay? So the problem with triangles is that, if I reveal the edges of this small graph in this way, and then this edge comes in, suddenly from 0 you go to n minus 2. So the Lipschitz constant is in general very, very bad. And this does not allow to standard existing methods to give you strong results. But what happens in this algorithm is that this setting does not happen frequently. So you can write the number of triangles as a multivariate polynomial, and you can quantify that in general, in average, it's smooth. So this thing is a worst case that you can overpass by a theorem due to Kim and Wu, a very powerful theorem. So this algorithm gives you a 1 over p square. Okay, so the speedup that you get from this algorithm depends on the method that you use to count triangles, your favorite triangle counting method, and there exist several. For instance, if you want to use an easy to describe triangle counting method, where you take a vertex and you look among its neighbors how many edges exist, then it gives you a 1 over p square algorithm. Simply because for every vertex, you look degree v choose 2 things. In expectation, this becomes p times degree. So you get a 1 over p square speed up. And let me say that we were the first to be able to guarantee in graphs with a realistic number of triangles order n speedups. So this method worked pretty well. But the question, and I will conclude with this, is whether we could do better than this algorithm. And actually the answer is yes. This is joint work with Rasmus Pei. So we're not going to do independent sampling. We're going to do correlated sampling. So what we're going to do is we're going to use n colors, and we're going to color the vertices of our graph uniformly at random. Okay? And then we're going to look the edges for which both endpoints receive the same color. Okay? So this is what the algorithm says. And just to have a parameter which has the notion of a probability, P is going to be 1 over the number of colors. Okay? So this is a probability in our setting. So now you count triangles in this monochromatic graph, and you scale by p squared, not p cubed. And here is the reason. So if I tell you that this edge is monochromatic and this edge is monochromatic, then you already know that this edge is monochromatic. So this is no longer an independent sampling. You cannot use the techniques from the other theorem. But still, we were able to analyze this sampling scheme. And why does this give you an improvement over the previous method? So if you recall, there was a t to the 1/3 in the denominator. And this 1/3 comes 1 over the degree of the multivariate polynomial. What we're doing here, in the previous algorithm, the multivariate polynomial was a sum over all triangles of the indicator variables whether this edge survived the sparsification. So the degree of this polynomial is 3, as you can see. But now in this correlated sampling scheme, the degree of the polynomial goes down to 2. So we're going to improve this t to the 1/3 and have a root t. That's the improvement. And here is the theorem. If p is greater than the maximum of these two quantities here, then you can guarantee concentration with high probability. And furthermore, we showed, using two graphs, that if you don't assume anything more about your graph, this is the best possible up to some log factors. Okay? So just to conclude, I would like to say that a recent paper by Kormode and Jauhari, so let me say I was mostly interested in MapReduce. Kormode and Jauhari noticed that this algorithm works very well in the streaming model. It's probably, so in the streaming model, you can guarantee this amount of space and concentrated guarantees. The other best-known paper, so it's hard to compare because they depend, you can see different parameters coming in. So what Kormode and Jauhari mentioned is that the dependence we have on the parameters for real graphs turns out to be the best known for the streaming model as well. At least this is a recent paper, so I don't know if anything newer has come up. Let me also say it's worth mentioning that Kormode and Jauhari proved that if you do constant number of passes, because these are constant passes, you need to have m over root t space. You cannot do better than that. So this term is tight in this case. Okay, so I would like to conclude. Two open problems. The first one is there exists a lot of structure in fitting piecewise constant segments. You can find certain relations, but it's hard to exploit them so far in a principled way. For instance, you know that if 2 points differ by that much, they will always be in 2 different segments. It's easy to see that. And furthermore, can we find a faster than n square algorithm? That's the first problem. And the second problem is come up with faster, approximate algorithms for finding triangles and dense subgraphs in real graphs. And let me say that one more broad research direction, which I've been working on and comes up a lot when you deal with real data, is that graphs evolve. Okay, so you can make friends in Facebook, you can unfriend them. You can do likes, you can do unlikes. So you have so graphs change. Typically, also the vertex set changes. And one of the goals that we have as a community is to come up with very efficient algorithms in this setting. And what I've been working on recently, since May actually, with Sayan, Monica, and Danupon, is coming up with algorithms for important graph mining problems that use both low space and low amortized time over the number of changes that you do. So I would like to thank you.
Hi, in the first problem that you presented, I mean, you started from the biological issues that you're trying to look at. So, I mean, what you presented has applications in other problems, but for the biology problem itself, I was wondering if just some simple methods, like some clustering type methods, could be enough to find the number of chromosomes or whatever CNVs are at each point. I mean, I can see that even k-means or even EM could work too. How do those compare with your method?
So that's a very interesting point. I have to say that I was much more interested not only on the application side, but also on the theory side. There exist many methods that work very well. So what turns out to happen on real data is that depending on the type of cancer, at least that's what I've been told by Dr. Shackney back ago, is that you observe very different kind of noise in lung cancer, in breast cancer. So this method that I just described works well for data where you have noise, but it's not too much, something that we observed in lung cancer. So there I would apply a different method. So it's very hard to say this method works best for all types of DNA copy number aberration data. So I'm sure that depending on your context, you can find the method that suits better your needs. Yeah.
About counting triangles. You mentioned that you use the triangle sparsifier and counting triangles with a coin, but did you try to count other subgraphs and adapt the sparsifier technique to that?
So let me say that very recently a paper came out that used both techniques on counting k clicks. It generalized. I was more interested in triangles, so I didn't say anything, but everything works out for k clicks. When you go to other types of subgraphs, you need to be more careful. What turns out to happen is that this is a paper by Finocchi from Italy, from a research group in Italy. They compared these schemes and two more schemes, one by Suri Vasilvitsky from DubDubDub, 2011, and another one by Foto Afrati Ullman on multi-way joins, because you can think of a triangle as finding a multi-way, a three join in a database, doing three joins in databases. And what they showed experimentally is that the method that I showed you with Rasmus Pay, the second one, is by far the best from every other method. Especially as you go, as you increase k, the benefits get more pronounced. And this is expected. We had mentioned that in our paper. And one more thing that I would like to say is that this scheme works very well when you try to find dense fixed size subgraphs, let's say k-click. If you want to find paths, then there exists a different scheme by Noga Alon called colorful. So they color and they look for rainbow paths, essentially, on the graph. I don't recall the exact terminology. It's by Alon Zvik and collaborators. So these two methods touch different extremes of the density of the subgraph you're trying to find. The one works for dense, the other for sparse.